Hello and welcome back to the Kratom Sobriety Podcast. I am here with Eli, someone who I am particularly excited to interview. He works as an attorney and he has been instrumental in answering a lot of our questions about the legality of some of the products that are circulating in the market. Would you mind sharing a bit about your background?
Absolutely. Yes. My name's Eli Cohen, and I'm an attorney at the Weatherington Law Firm based in Atlanta, Georgia. And I am a personal injury attorney, which means I represent people who've been hurt in a variety of ways, whether that's car crashes. In particular, though, we're obviously going to talk a little bit about kratom. So my background, again, I've been an attorney for a little over 5 years. Prior to that, I was a police officer here in Georgia for about 12 years. Where I had to have a lot of fun working on patrol, doing things like narcotics investigations, and spent about 3 years on the SWAT team, which was also a very good time. Outside of being a lawyer, I'm also an officer in the Army Reserve as an intelligence officer, which is just a fun opportunity. And really what that says about me is I generally pick jobs where they tell me what to wear, which just makes my life a little bit easier.
Seriously, you can't see we're on camera right now, but I'm wearing pajamas. Obviously, we can only see the torso, but I'm sure you're well dressed in every area.
If your viewers can't see me, I'm absolutely in a t-shirt. I work from home as an attorney. We obviously go to court, and I will dress in a suit when I go to court and things like that. So for day-to-day work, I work from home, and I love it. It provides me
I respect it.
Yeah, it's a lot of opportunity to see my family.
Absolutely. Yeah, it definitely looks like you don't pick easy jobs is, I think, the first thing I'd say. And then the second thing I'd want to ask is, how did you stumble upon tackling kratom-related cases?
I think stumbled upon is probably a great way to put it. So the first case that I got into was a case that's still pending. It's Pope versus OPMS. That's one of our cases that kind of took off a lot of news coverage. That case came to us by our partner law firm, ATL Law. A couple of guys named Drew Ashby, Max Thielen, and Seth Lowry. They called us and asked if we wanted to partner on that case. My firm and I had other supplement cases involving companies. Most recently, it's a company called Black Oxygen Organic that claimed to be selling essentially magic dirt, but research found that just wasn't quite the case, as you can imagine. And so they called us and asked if we want to partner. And I had a previous relationship with Max. Both Max and I are in the Army Reserves, and he was actually my JAG, or my Army lawyer, when we were in Iraq together, which is how we first met. So we partnered up, and kratom just took off because sadly, there's just a lot of people who've been injured by kratom.
So would you say that with your experience with these cases, that might be one of the things that, partially motivates you to take them on or do your research?
Absolutely. In general, the thing I love about personal injury law is that I'm helping just regular people who've been hurt, right? I don't represent corporations, I'm not doing some weird contract negotiations. It's just ordinary people who've been hurt, sometimes by individuals, often by corporations. And I get to represent their interests against sometimes some of the biggest companies in the world. So that's certainly motivating. And then when it comes to the kratom, some of these companies very much feel like fly by night. And I tell people all the time, often it feels like I'm just chasing drug dealers again.
That's a fantastic thing to hear because I think it's a suspicion that a lot of us share in the community. And the legal side of it, I think, is often obscured from users and people who've struggled with the addiction. Knowing what it's like from your perspective is definitely interesting. So we have a lot of questions about just the lack of federal regulation and how that impacts the safety and legality of kratom. Would you mind touching a bit on that?
Yeah, of course. And let me do my lawyer thing first by saying I'm obviously not your lawyer, nor am I anyone who's listening's lawyer. And so this isn't legal advice, and they should call a real lawyer if they want legal advice, or they should call their lawyer. It falls in this interesting space, or at least they try to put it inside of an interesting space. But let's back up big picture just for a second. For the most part, the things you could consume, right, the things you would put in your mouth, fall into three categories. Some things are drugs, medicine, right? And that's easy to understand. Some things are food, right? Like an orange, right? That's also easy to understand. And then there's something in the middle called supplements or health supplements, right? Actually dietary supplements. And those things are not intended to be meals. They're intended to do just what the name suggests, supplement your diet with something, whether it be vitamins or minerals or something, or provide some other supplementation to something that affects the body. From what I've seen, kratom companies very much don't want to be supplements because they're subject to additional regulation And in fact, so far there have been 4 attempts to get kratom approved as a new dietary ingredient, and the FDA keeps rejecting it. They keep saying that there's not enough information to show that kratom is safe for its intended purpose. And then so what kratom's fallen back on is we're just food. We're just like the orange. But it's just not an accurate description of what kratom is. But herbs and botanicals are supplements, but they're attempting to sit inside of food regulation because it's a little bit easier for them to operate. And then many of the kratom manufacturers that I have lawsuits against, they don't even claim to be food. I've taken quite a few depositions of owners of kratom companies, and a consistent theme that these companies have in their depositions is they'll say, I don't have an intended purpose for my product. I don't know what people do with it. It seems like a insane position to take under oath, especially that they claim they have no idea what people do with their kratom product. They don't know if people consume it. Yeah, at the same time, when I ask them questions like, have you ever had kratom? They always say yes. Have they ever had their kratom? They always say yes. And they'll have statements on their website, FDA disclaimer, this product is not intended to prevent, treat, or cure any disease, which is an odd thing to have on something that's you claim is not food. All right, I don't know if you've ever picked up a box of light bulbs, but it does not have an FDA label on it.
No, it certainly does not, and I'm glad it doesn't.
So that's like the broad landscape of, at least federally, how kratom is classified or kratom not classified.
That's fascinating. And I think when you sit these people down to the fact that you've actually had a chance to sit down with some of these owners and talk about it, and under oath, they're of course obliged to tell the truth. I think it's interesting that's the position that they take, knowing full well, I think that if you're born today and you're even at all interested in kratom, you would know that the first thing that people usually think to do with it is to ingest it in some form or another. So I think that you've had an experience to sit down with some of these people is fascinating. But moving on to that human consumption, how does the labeling of those kratom products as not for human consumption actually affect the legal accountability for manufacturers and sellers?
From my perspective, it makes them look more guilty, not less. Like, it certainly provides no protection. So labeling the product not for human consumption really doesn't affect or provide them any protection, in my view. And the reason being is that it's not true. Like, I've seen products that say not for human consumption, and then we'll have a serving size on the back of it. Right? Or maybe they'll have a nutritional label or a supplement label, something that just makes no sense to say that it's not for human consumption. Or you go to their website and they'll have blogs or their customers leave comments about how this great. It's just not real. And so that's why I don't think it has much effect, because no one believes it.
Yeah, and on that, I think that if you've ever seen the not for human consumption label on one of these packages, it's not designed to be in your face, and it's not designed to be on the forefront of the packaging. I think if you do see it, it's in tiny black lettering on the back of the package at the bottom. And I think that says something about what effect they'd want that label to have on the consumers that are going to purchase it, which is none.
That's right. We've seen it. We've seen not for human consumption on extract bottles, like liquid extract bottles that are designed to look just like a 5-hour energy drink. It is a literal drink. And then they say not for human consumption. I'm not sure what it's an absolute absurd position. And so slapping some not for human consumption label on your product when people are actually going to buy it just to drink it, it's just not effective.
No. And so would you say that it's absolutely not a valid legal shield for these manufacturers if it were a day in court?
So I will tell you that I've sued a lot of companies that have listed on their product not for human consumption, and that frankly hasn't stopped us.
Yeah. Another question I was curious to ask is, from your perspective, I think it seems as though we've already answered it, but do you think the labeling is used in good faith, or do you think that it's mostly a way for them to avoid that regulation or liability?
Certainly, I am the opinion that slapping things like not for human consumption, or not putting any serving sizes, or if they have directions, they'll just say consult with your physician. I certainly believe that they do that to provide themselves some cover. But the fact of the matter, it doesn't, because the rules are clear, right? If, when you sell a food product, you need to have nutritional facts or supplement facts. You need to have serving sizes. You need to have dosing sizes. And when you sell a supplement or a food, you need to be able to show that it's safe for its intended purpose. And they're just not doing that.
Yeah. So, Eli, I know that something that comes our way ever so often is someone will come to us with a spouse or a husband or a wife in a wrongful death case where kratom is the primary suspect. So have you ever been involved in that type of litigation, or is that not quite your wheelhouse?
No, that's exactly what I do. So I would say I have some 30 clients who have a loved one who died as a result of taking kratom.
How do you think that's influenced your perception of kratom as a drug, and more importantly, its kind of impact on?
Certainly from my perspective, I don't think that the cost benefit analysis of consuming kratom weighs in favor of consuming it. Other people have different views. And yeah, I'm certainly not oblivious to the fact that there are probably thousands of people who are using kratom safely and have used it successfully. And for whatever it is, whether they're using it for energy or to get off other opiates. And I am very glad that nothing bad has happened to them. But from my perspective, it feels they're playing Russian roulette. And that one day they're just going to get the chain votes loaded.
That's a great way of putting it. And I'm glad that you're there actually helping these people, because I know that the resources feel limited, especially from a legal perspective. I know that is a really tricky and overwhelming ground to navigate for a lot of people.
Yeah, and one thing people should know about personal injury law, and this is true across the country, and you see it on like the commercials for the companies that kind of advertise personal injury law. You're like, you pay us nothing unless we win. And to me, that comes off very like cheesy, but that actually is just how the personal injury bar operates. Because if you're an ordinary person that doesn't have millions of dollars, you can't pay an attorney at an hourly rate hoping you win. And so in order to provide people with access to lawyers, so they can exercise their rights, the plaintiffs bar and personal injury attorneys in particular created the system where, there's a percentage, but we only get it if we win, which means that we can only take cases that we think we can win, frankly, because it means the law firm won't become sustainable. And so that's just how we ensure, and I say we, I mean, as an industry, that people have access to quality legal representation. It is through that system.
That's very noble. And I wouldn't want to take on a case that I didn't think I could win, regardless of how much I was going to make off of it.
I generally don't take on cases that I don't think I can win. So that is part of it.
Good.
For sure. Which again,
so back to the not for human consumption. In those wrongful death cases, have you seen courts take that kind of labeling seriously, or?
I have not had a trial yet on a kratom case. So I've settled a good bit of cases, some for 6, some for 7 figures, but no one has wanted to go to trial yet. I suspect that if you're a kratom manufacturer and you have those kinds of ridiculous things on your packaging and you take the position that you don't know what people do with it, you're not keen to get in front of 12 ordinary citizens who I suspect will see right through that BS.
And that's a good way to put it. If you're sitting in front of a jury and you're putting it to them, I think the obvious answer would be, I see right through what's going on here, and you have nary a chance. Back to marketing strategies just for kratom and your perception of how these companies are operating when it relates to that. How do you think the marketing strategies that you've seen for these kratom products influence consumer perceptions? Because there's a popular kratom kava tonic brand out there that is pretty vocal about benefits. I think that there's a lot of products out there that seem to market it as a supplement that's close to the earth and organic.
So I think the marketing strategies seem to be run the gambit with probably any kind of product that is in the health sphere, at least they want to be. So you've seen people who push very hard about it being just an all natural leaf. And then on the other side, you'll see companies that push it for essentially its medical benefits. And then note on that, its FDA's enforcement has been lax, unfortunately, towards kratom. One thing they will go after is companies that make improper health claims. So if we're not otherwise approved by the FDA to treat or prevent or cure some kind of disease, you can't make health claims. So when manufacturers of any product that aren't drugs say things like can treat anxiety, can treat pain, can treat opioid addiction. Those are all improper health claims. And in fact, when you make an improper health claim as to your food product or your supplement, you've actually turned your product into an unapproved drug. And the FDA looks at you as a drug manufacturer who's operating without approval. And so that's what essentially some of these companies are doing when they make those kinds of claims, is that they are becoming illegal drugs, essentially.
That's fascinating. And I know that I've seen a lot of our guests come on here, and I think that a lot of the users tend to do most of the marketing, which is unfortunate because you have these companies that know that. So they don't need to push a lot of literature on what its benefits are, how it promotes wakefulness, how it's similar to an opioid in its analgesic effects, because everyone is out there on forums talking about exactly what it's done for them, which I think allow those companies to fly by night and limit how much of it they actually do.
I think that's right. I think that oftentimes they will sell a product and not necessarily say those things because they know other people will say it for them, which, yeah, that's other people. Yeah, I back up. Individuals have rights and they can talk about how they use Kratom and why they use it and what it does for them. If you have First Amendment right to talk about nearly anything. But as long as you're not also trying to sell the product, that's when you can get into trouble.
Yes, that is the hairy part of it. So to the American Kratom Association, the AKA, what role do they play in certifying these products? And do you know if it's been involved in any recent legal cases, or what's your experience with them?
Sure, absolutely. So AKA is a defendant in several of my lawsuits. So we have sued them as co-conspirators to some of the biggest Kratom brands like OPMS. And what we allege is twofold. One, that they are a conspirator in just the sale of Kratom. That is, AKA is essentially OPMS's marketing arm, and therefore they're just as liable for anything OPMS does. But also, we allege that AKA GMP program to at least OPMS and potentially other Kratom brands is illusory, fake, not real, is what we allege in our lawsuit. And so that we have not seen any kind of GMP inspection documents in those cases that would refute those allegations. And the AKA's role seems to be that they market Kratom. The other thing they do is they've created what they call the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, and they go state by state pushing that law. So, for example, I'm in Georgia. In 2018, the AKA came here, lobbied to push their KCPA, and they were successful. They got it passed. And they tout it as providing protections for consumers, right? It has labeling requirements, and it says you can't sell to people under 21 or 18. Except the bill as passed by them had no penalties. Nobody was assigned to enforce it. It wasn't criminal. And so it wasn't a real safety act because nobody was held accountable for violating it. And really what that bill, in my opinion, does is backdoor legalizes Kratom in the states. Because if a state says how you can sell something, you legalize it. You're saying you can sell it, which is a much easier thing to do, that is push a safety bill, than it is to walk into a legislature's office and ask them, hey, can you legalize Kratom? That's a hard sell. But if you walk into their office and say, hey, can we make Kratom safe? That's a much easier sell to an elected official. And so actually what we were able to do in 2023, I believe, 22, is work to change that bill. We had a representative, Rick Townsend, who was awesome. We actually sat down with the AKA and came to a compromise bill. They eventually decided they didn't like it and fought us to get it passed, but it did pass. And it put some limits here in Georgia on the strength of Kratom extracts. It also added criminal penalties to manufacturers and sellers who knowingly violate the law. So this way, these companies actually had to provide proper labeling and things like that. So for example, when we were arguing in Georgia over amending the KCPA, one of the things I did is I showed up to the hearing with bottles of OPMS, Remarkable Herb, and Whole Herb, I believe. Each one of those are AKA GMP approved brands, at least they were at the time. I'm pretty sure they still are. None of them met Georgia's labeling requirements or the AKA's labeling requirements at that time. Yet they still maintained their certification. And so it was just an example of why enforcement means are important.
Yeah, because it doesn't seem like there was any, you were right in saying that it doesn't seem like anyone is going to do anything unless there's actual consequences for actions and a legitimate structure for enforcement. But I think that's a fantastic way that you did it, was to bring those physical bottles there to show everyone that it didn't meet the standards whatsoever. So we're going to move on and just talk a little bit more about the health risks. So I know you've been involved in a lot of these wrongful death cases. I know that there's issues around safety and adverse health outcome. So I guess just from a legal perspective, just from what you've seen, what are some of those health risks that you've seen be associated with kratom use, and how do those risks factor into the cases that you handle?
Sure. The number one health risk from consuming kratom is death. It's the ultimate health risk. Yes. Other common issues we've seen are seizures and addiction. Those are probably the three biggest things that we've seen with kratom. Generally, we're not taking cases right now on addiction, frankly, because we just wouldn't be able to handle the volume of people who have become addicted to kratom. We probably get 2 to 3 calls a day. I'm at my law firm with people who said they're addicted to a kratom product. And unfortunately, I don't have the manpower to handle that. And so we focus on the wrongful death cases. And then obviously death is also very common. And then seizures are the other thing we see quite a bit. And oftentimes the seizure is something that leads to death, precipitates someone passing away.
And then, of course, you've said that you haven't been to trial yet, but in terms of proving causation between kratom use and these adverse health outcomes in court, can you discuss some of the challenges you've run into?
Sure. So this is true for all cases, right? And fraud, personal injury 101, if you want. In order to be successful in court in a tort, in a wrongful act, I have to be able to prove that there was a duty. You have a duty not to do something or to do something, right? I have a duty not to punch you in the face. If I violate that duty,
please don't.
But if I did punch you in the face, it's a terrible example for this podcast, but if I punched you in the face, I would have breached that duty, right? And then the question is, were you injured? And let's just say I hit you hard. I punched you in the face, and actually I broke your nose and you had to get medical treatment.
It was awful.
Exactly, right? So now I had a duty not to do something. I breached that duty, caused your injury, and now you have damages, right? You have pain and suffering, you have medical bills. Those are all the things I need to prove in every personal injury case. And so when it comes to, causation being one of those, that is that whatever the wrongful act, the breach was, that's what actually caused your damages. And so that you're right. I have to prove that it was the kratom that actually did the killing, if you will. And the way we do that is with experts. So we will retain toxicologists, medical examiners, or other doctors who will review our clients' medical records. They will review the relevant literature on kratom, and they will come to an opinion about whether or not kratom was causative of the death. And generally speaking, that's done by looking at toxicology reports, seeing what chemicals were in the decedent's system at the time of death. And oftentimes it involves just ruling out, like there's nothing else here. The autopsy shows that it was a healthy young individual. The only thing in their system was kratom, or maybe the only thing in their system at a level that was lethal was kratom. And therefore, the cause of death must have been kratom because nothing else could have done this. So those are ways that causation is proved. And again, that's through the use of medical and scientific experts.
Wow. So these toxicologists that you have on retainer, I'm sure that kratom started showing up not too long ago in terms of it being fresh. I think other drugs have a lot more time on the market. They have a lot more time in the system, and there's been time for research, science, etc., to catch up, to figure out what these drugs are actually doing to the body, to the system, to the organs. So these experts that have you noticed them have any trouble with the kind of fledgling position that research about kratom and its health impacts?
Sure. Like it would be nice if there was more research into kratom to fully understand. And certainly more research would also mean that the product would just be safer because companies would know more about it. Because the reality is that generally speaking, the companies that sell kratom have done zero research themselves into the product. They're just essentially drop shipping or wholesaling kratom.
Yes.
And so I'm sure every expert or every scientist would love more data. But unfortunately, they're stuck with kind of what they have here. And the reality is there is plenty of data there are research studies out there on kratom, whether it's with animals or not. And again,
So, how would you see what kind of obviously the best advice period would be for no one to consume it at all, but what kinds of advice would you give to these consumers who are consuming it to ensure they're using these products safely and legally?
I'm not a doctor, so I can't give people health advice, but from my perspective, I would tell anyone I meet, all my friends know, don't try kratom. That is what I tell them.
Yeah, do
There
not.
are there are other things out there that can provide. If you're looking for energy, there's things for energy. If you're looking for opioid treatments, there's things for opioid treatments. Pain relief, there's things for pain relief. The there are too many unknowns about kratom, and the reality is the manufacturing market, that is the industry that is kratom, is too immature, so that you don't actually know that you're buying from a reputable dealer, or that person's just not in their garage packaging that kratom by hand. And the bag looks nice. It looks like it's an all natural product, but it's just somebody in their garage. And that's the truth of the world, is that the market is too immature. The industry is not regulated. Nobody's doing inspections. No one's ensuring that these products are safe or testing every batch. And frankly, the manufacturers don't fully understand what they're providing their consumer. For example, 7-hydroxymetragine is one of the metabolites in kratom, said to be some multiple times worse than morphine. Right, 7-hydroxymetragine is a metabolite of metragine, which is the alkaloid inside of kratom. 7-hydroxymetragine does not exist in the leaf on the tree. It is created through the manufacturing process. That is the drying, the grinding, the sitting on the shelf. All of that can increase the level of 7-hydroxymetragine. So the manufacturer can't even tell you what level of these alkaloids and drugs are going to be in the product once it's in your hand. And so the immaturity of the market, my recommendation to my friends and family is just stay away.
I think that's a wise opinion. The easiest thing to do is to never try it at all. So let's see here. Eli, so for people who have experienced those adverse effects from kratom, what kind of steps should they take to seek legal help, or if they wanted to get in touch with you? Or
So if someone's been injured by kratom, or frankly, otherwise, happy to have a chat with them. Again, I'm at the Weatherington Law Firm, and my cell phone number, if somebody wants to talk, is 470-880-8222. I'm barred in Georgia, but I so far have taken cases in about 10 states. And the way that works generally is I find a partner counsel in that state and then file a motion to come in for that case. But I'm happy to have a chat with anybody about whether or not they have a case, or if it's something I can help them with. And if I can't help them, point them in the direction of somebody who maybe that can.
That's fantastic. So how do you see the legal landscape for kratom evolving in the next few years with regulations and the parties involved?
Certainly, my lawsuits and some of the other firms who are suing kratom have changed the way kratom operates. And it might be helpful to explain how lawsuits work, and maybe I'll plug this in somewhere. But these lawsuits that involve wrongful death are centered around what's called products liability law. And essentially, products liability law says that if you sell a product to a consumer, you have a duty to make sure that product is safe. And when you violate that duty, you can be sued. And those violations or those duties come in three forms. The first form is called negligent design. That is, the way your product is designed is negligent. So imagine you made a knife, and that knife is all blade, no handle. And people were hurt by it, right? That would be a bad design.
Terrible.
Probably, maybe the most famous is the Ford Pinto. There was a bad design of a car. Very bad. The second kind of manufacturing or products liability case is what's called a manufacturing defect, where your design wasn't bad, but this exact product, as it came off the assembly line, that was defective. So you go back to the knife, you designed a knife, you put a handle on it, but this one knife came out the factory without a handle on it. That would be a manufacturing defect. It's not how it was designed. It's that this one came out of the factory bad. And the last kind of products liability case involves a warning defect. That is, your product has a known hazard. You know how your consumers, or should know how your consumers are going to use your product. And there's a defect that is unavoidable, whatever that defect is, right? Knives are going to be sharp and you could cut yourself on them. And you have a duty to warn consumers about known dangers of your product. So the knife, that one might be a little too obvious, right? The reason you're buying it is because it's sharp. But imagine a whole host of products that maybe have some kind of potential danger. They have a duty to warn you about those dangers. And so that's why when you buy a lawnmower, it comes with a long book that tells you not to put your hand in the blade. And so where Kratom is failing is in the design and in the warning. So design-wise, Kratom is, for its intended purpose, that is to be consumed as a dietary supplement, it's not safe as it's designed. So one of the things we allege is that there's no reason for mitragynine to be in the product. They have no scientific reason to keep mitragynine in. If their only reason to keep mitragynine in is because that's the alkaloid that provides pain or energy, pain relief or energy, or opioid relief, those are all drug-related reasons, and you should have a medicine. And then when it comes to warning defects, these packages, like we talked about earlier, have often not for human consumption, or they'll have consult with a physician, or they won't say anything about how to use the product, knowing full well that individuals are going to consume the product, that tens of thousands of people have reported addiction problems, that there's dozens and dozens of lawsuits and reports of people dying after consuming Kratom, that mixed drug interactions with Kratom, things like antidepressants or other drugs, may cause you to have an adverse reaction. If you're a seller, a corporation who sells Kratom, you should know these things, or you do know these things, and you have a duty to warn your consumers about that. And instead, it seems like they pretend like they don't exist.
Yeah, speaking of that duty, what kind of measures do you think can be taken to actually improve consumer safety and that regulatory oversight of those Kratom products where the actual manufacturers are not so much so following through with their responsibilities?
So I think that the FDA needs to crack down on Kratom products. That is, they are supplements, or at the very least, they're food. I believe that they're supplements, and that every time one of these products hits a shelf without a supplement facts section or a nutritional facts section, they should be taken off the market. That means they're misbranded. It means they're adulterated and they're illegal. They have no business being on the shelf. And states generally already have laws that adapt FDA regulation, but states can go a step further, like we did here in Georgia and many other states have, that create specific labeling requirements for Kratom and then follow up with those, enforce those rules against the vendors that sell Kratom, and then go after the manufacturers who are shipping these adulterated and misbranded products into your states.
Great, Eli. I'm glad we have you on the side of the law, helping people with everything that's going on right now when it comes to suffering from whether it be wrongful death or anything else of that matter when it comes to Kratom. So what you're doing is great. Is there anything else that I didn't ask you that you want to touch on?
I'm sure there is, but nothing else.
There always is something you think of when the call ends. Yeah,
that's exactly how this will go.
Always, exactly. Yeah, Eli, thank you so much for joining me. This was a very enlightening conversation, and thank you for doing so much good work. If you guys want to get in touch with Eli at Wetherington Law Firm, his phone number is a little earlier on in the conversation. Otherwise, you can just listen to him here on this podcast, and we hope to have you back again sometime soon.
Anytime.
Awesome. All right. Bye-bye, Eli.